The tea had gone cold in my hands 20 minutes ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move from the kitchen window. Outside, December snow fell in lazy spirals, each flake catching the amber glow of the streetlights like tiny promises of peace. At 62, I'd learned that such promises were often lies. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My reflection stared back from the glass. Silver hair pulled into the same neat bun I'd worn for 30 years. Reading glasses perched on my nose. The deep lines around my eyes that Hudson used to trace with his fingertips before the cancer took him 3 years ago. I looked like what I was. A widow, a mother, a woman whose children had their own lives now. A woman who filled her evenings with crossword puzzles and British mysteries on PBS. The house felt too large around me, every room echoing with memories of when it had been full. Donald's baseball trophies still lined the mantel, though he was 35 now with a wife and career of his own. Heidi's art projects from elementary school remained tacked to the bulletin board in what used to be her bedroom, despite her living 2 states away with her own family. Christmas was 3 days away, and for the first time in decades, I would spend it alone. Donald had called last week, his voice carrying that careful tone children use when they're about to disappoint their parents. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but Lydia's family is having this big reunion in Colorado, and we promised we'd be there. I know we usually do Christmas at your place, but it's fine," I'd said, though my heart had clenched like a fist. You should be with her family. Heidi's excuse had been similar. Her in-laws in Portland, a skiing trip that had been planned for months. Both my children, scattered to the winds by marriages and obligations that somehow never included their mother. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, watching my breath fog the window. This wasn't self-pity, I told myself. This was just the natural order of things. Children grew up, moved away, started their own traditions. I should be grateful they were happy and settled. But gratitude felt thin and brittle in the empty house. The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected in the silence. I glanced at the clock, 8:47 p.m., too late for deliveries, too early for emergencies. I set down my cold tea and made my way to the front door, my slippers whispering against the hardwood floors. Through the peephole, I saw Donald standing on my porch, his tall frame hunched against the cold. Snow dusted his dark hair, and his face wore an expression I couldn't quite read. Urgent, almost desperate. "Donald?" I opened the door, stepping back as cold air rushed in around him. "What are you doing here? I thought you were leaving for Colorado tomorrow." He stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots onto the welcome mat. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, but there was something else in his face. A tightness around his eyes that reminded me of when he was 7 and had accidentally broken my favorite vase. "We need to talk, Mom." His voice was rough, strained. Can I come in?" "Of course." I closed the door behind him, studying his face. "Donald, what's wrong? Did you get the ring?" The words tumbled out of him in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for hours. "The diamond ring I sent you for your birthday? Did you like it?" I blinked, confusion settling over me like fog. "What ring?" The color drained from his face. The diamond ring, from Hartley's jewelry downtown. I had them engrave it for Mom, with love. It was supposed to arrive 2 weeks ago. "Donald, I never received any ring." I reached out, touching his arm. "Are you sure you sent it to the right address?" His face crumpled, and suddenly he looked like that 7-year-old boy again, lost and frightened. Oh God, Mom, I think I know what happened." "What do you mean?" "If there was a delivery problem, we can call the jewelry store tomorrow and—" "It wasn't a delivery problem." His voice was barely a whisper. "It was Lydia. It had to be Lydia." The name hung between us like a blade. Lydia, his wife of 5 years. Lydia, with her perfect blonde hair and designer clothes and the way she always seemed to find reasons why they couldn't visit me more often. Lydia, who had somehow convinced my son that her family's Christmas traditions were more important than the ones we'd built together over 35 years. "Donald, that's a serious accusation. Maybe there's a simple explanation." "No." He ran his hands through his hair, leaving it standing in dark spikes. "Mom, there are things I haven't told you. Things I've been trying not to see." I led him to the living room, my mind racing. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments Donald and Heidi had made as children, construction paper angels and popsicle stick reindeer, faded now but precious. Under its branches, 3 wrapped presents waited, one for Donald, one for Lydia, and one for Heidi's family that I'd planned to mail tomorrow. Donald collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. I found receipts, Mom. Casino receipts. Hundreds of them, hidden in her car, and credit card statements she thought I didn't see. Cash advances, jewelry stores, pawn shops. The words hit me like physical blows. Donald, the ring I bought for you cost $3,000. His voice was hollow. I saved for months to buy it. Worked overtime at the firm. I wanted to give you something beautiful. Something that would show you how much I... He looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. She took it, didn't she? She took your birthday present and sold it. I sat down beside him, my mind struggling to process this revelation. Lydia. Gambling. Lydia. Stealing from her own husband. From me. It felt surreal, like something from one of those afternoon soap operas I used to mock. Are you certain? I asked quietly. Sometimes there are explanations we don't see. I called the jewelry store an hour ago. His voice was flat, defeated. They confirmed the delivery, signed for by Lydia Lemon at our address, 2 weeks ago. When I confronted her tonight, she tried to lie, said it must have been stolen from the porch, but then I found the pawn receipt in her purse. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of betrayal. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in deceptive purity. $300, Donald continued, his voice breaking. She pawned your $3,000 ring for $300. Probably lost it all at the casino that same night. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, like a stone dropping into still water. This wasn't just about a stolen ring. This was about the systematic erosion of trust, the violation of the most sacred bonds between family members. This was about a woman who had taken my son's love and twisted it into something ugly and painful. How long has this been going on? I asked. I don't know. Maybe since the beginning. I've been so stupid, Mom. So blind. He looked at me with eyes that had aged years in the span of our conversation. She's been lying about the business trips, the late nights at work, the money she said she was investing for our future. It's all been lies. I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he took his first steps, when he'd skinned his knees, when he'd graduated college. But now it was a man's hand, calloused and strong, and it was shaking. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. His voice was barely audible. I love her, Mom. Or I thought I did. But I don't even know who she really is anymore. As I sat there holding my son's hand, watching him crumble under the weight of his wife's betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The passive acceptance that had characterized my recent years, the quiet resignation to being forgotten, overlooked, treated as an afterthought, began to crack. This wasn't just about a ring. This was about respect, about the bonds between family members that should be sacred and inviolate, about a woman who had systematically poisoned my relationship with my son while stealing from both of us. Donald, I said softly, tell me everything. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw not the successful lawyer, not the dutiful husband, but my child, my boy who needed his mother. And as he began to speak, telling me about the lies and deceptions that had been woven through his marriage like poison threads, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not let this stand. The coffee grew cold between us as Donald's words painted a picture I wished I could unsee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd helped him with homework, where Hudson and I had shared 30 years of morning conversations, where I now ate my solitary meals. But tonight, it felt like a war room. She said she was visiting her sick aunt in Phoenix last month, Donald continued, his voice hollow with exhaustion. I even sent flowers to the hospital. But I found the hotel receipt in her jacket pocket yesterday. She was at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was cataloging every detail. Atlantic City, a gambling destination, not visiting family, but feeding an addiction while lying to her husband about a dying relative. What about the business trips? I asked, pouring myself another cup of coffee. My hands were steady, but inside, a familiar calculation was beginning. The same methodical thinking that had helped me manage household finances for decades, that had guided me through Hudson's medical bills and insurance claims. Only now, I was calculating the scope of betrayal. Those were lies, too. Donald rubbed his eyes, looking older than his 35 years. I called her office yesterday, pretending I needed to reach her urgently. Her boss said she'd taken vacation days for most of those trips. Vacation days she never told me about. How many trips? 6 in the past 4 months. Always for 3 or 4 days. Always with some story about difficult clients or training seminars. He looked up at me, his face etched with pain. I trusted her completely, Mom. I never questioned anything. The weight of his trust, so thoroughly violated, settled in my chest like a physical ache. But beneath the sympathy, something sharper was taking shape. Lydia hadn't just betrayed Donald. She had systematically excluded me from their lives, created distance between us with her lies and manipulations. Donald, the Christmas visits we've missed over the years, her family emergencies, the last-minute changes of plans, his face crumpled with understanding. Those were probably lies too, weren't they? I thought of the Thanksgiving 2 years ago when they'd canceled because Lydia's mother had supposedly fallen ill. The Easter when her cousin's wedding had suddenly taken priority. The 4th of July barbecue I'd planned, only to have them bow out because Lydia had forgotten about a work commitment. Each cancellation had been wrapped in apology and necessity, delivered through Donald with Lydia's regrets and promises to make it up to me. But now, viewed through the lens of systematic deception, they formed a different pattern entirely. She didn't want me around, I said quietly. She needed you isolated so her lies would be easier to maintain. Jesus. Donald put his head in his hands. I let her do it. I let her push you away. You didn't know, I said. But even as I offered comfort, my mind was working. Lydia hadn't just stolen from us. She had stolen time. Years of family gatherings, holidays, ordinary moments that we could never recover. She had made me believe my children no longer needed me, no longer wanted me around. The manipulation had been surgical in its precision. There's more, Donald said, his voice barely audible. The money she said she was investing for our future. I found the statements, Mom. She's been gambling it away for months, maybe longer. How much money? Our down payment fund, $47,000. He looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. We were supposed to buy a house next spring, start trying for kids, build a real life together. $47,000. The ring, the lies, the systematic isolation. I felt my jaw tighten as the full scope of Lydia's betrayal revealed itself. This wasn't just addiction. This was predatory behavior toward her own husband and his family. Donald, where is she now? At her sister's house. I told her I needed time to think. He laughed bitterly. She actually had the nerve to act hurt that I didn't trust her explanation about the ring. Said I was being paranoid and controlling. The audacity of it, turning his justified suspicions into character flaws, spoke to a level of manipulation that made my skin crawl. Lydia wasn't just gambling away their money. She was gaslighting Donald into doubting his own perceptions. What did her explanation sound like? I asked. That she'd signed for the package but put it in the hall closet and forgot about it. When she went to look for it yesterday, it was gone. She thinks maybe the cleaning lady took it. Donald's voice was flat with defeat. But we don't have a cleaning lady, Mom. And I found the pawn receipt in her purse with yesterday's date on it. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the snow-covered street. My reflection stared back again, but this time I saw something different in my eyes. Not the tired resignation of a forgotten mother, but the sharp focus of a woman who had been underestimated. Donald, I need you to think carefully. Has Lydia ever asked you about me? About my routines, my finances, my living situation? He was quiet for a long moment. She asked about your house a few times. Whether you had a mortgage, what it was worth. I thought she was just making conversation. What did you tell her? That you owned it outright. That Dad had paid it off before he died. That it was probably worth around $400,000 now. He paused. Why? I turned back to face him, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Has she ever suggested that you should talk to me about downsizing, moving to a retirement community, Anything about what would happen to this house? Donald's face went pale. Last month, she said you seemed lonely, rattling around in such a big place, that maybe we should talk to you about selling it and finding somewhere smaller, more manageable. And what did you say? I said it was your decision to make, but that if you ever wanted to downsize, Lydia and I would help you find something nice. He stared at me, horror dawning in his expression. Oh, God. She wasn't being thoughtful, was she? She was planning something. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December night. Lydia hadn't just been stealing from Donald. She had been positioning herself to potentially manipulate me out of my home, the house that represented my security, my independence, my last tangible connection to the life Hudson and I had built together. Donald, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded, his face ashen. Has Lydia ever asked you for my Wi-Fi password? Or used my internet when you visited? Yes. Last time we were here, she said her phone data was running low and asked if she could use your Wi-Fi to upload some work files. He frowned. Why does that matter? A slow smile spread across my face. Not warm, but coldly satisfied. Because I'm more technologically aware than either of you realized. And because people who think elderly women are helpless often make crucial mistakes. I walked to the small desk in the corner where I kept my laptop. The same laptop I used for online banking, for researching Hudson's medical treatments, for maintaining the detailed financial records that had kept our family afloat through 30 years of marriage. 3 months ago, when Lydia used my Wi-Fi, I said, opening the laptop and navigating to my router's admin panel, she uploaded files from her device, large files that took several minutes to transfer. Donald watched, bewildered, as I pulled up logs I'd saved automatically. I keep copies of all device activity on my network, I continued, scrolling through timestamps and IP addresses. It's a security measure Hudson taught me after he read about identity theft targeting seniors. Mom, what are you saying? I turned the screen toward him, pointing to a series of entries from 3 months ago. These are Lydia's device activities from that visit. She wasn't uploading work files, Donald. She was downloading casino promotional materials, hotel booking confirmations, and correspondence with a debt consolidation company. Donald leaned forward, his face illuminating in the laptop's glow as he read the file names and timestamps. Paradise Casino Resort, Borgata booking confirmation, Atlantic City weekend package. All dated for the same weekend she told you she was visiting her sick aunt in Phoenix. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of documented deception. Donald stared at the screen, his breathing shallow. You saved all this? I save everything, Donald. Your father taught me that information is power, and power is protection. I closed the laptop and looked at my son. Really looked at him. Lydia isn't just a gambling addict who made bad choices. She's a predator who has systematically deceived you, stolen from both of us, and manipulated our family relationships to serve her addiction. Donald sat back in his chair, the full reality of his situation finally hitting him. She's going to want half of everything in the divorce, isn't she? She's going to try, I said quietly, but she made one crucial error. What's that? I smiled, a cold, calculating expression that would have surprised anyone who knew me as the quiet widow who kept to herself. She assumed I was just a harmless old woman who wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. She was wrong on both counts. As I watched understanding dawn in my son's eyes, I felt the last vestige of my passive acceptance crumble away. For 3 years since Hudson's death, I had accepted being treated as an afterthought, had swallowed the loneliness and isolation as natural consequences of aging. But Lydia had made this personal. She had stolen not just money and jewelry, but time and relationships and trust. And now she was going to learn that some women grow more dangerous with age, not more vulnerable. Christmas Eve arrived gray and bitter, the kind of day that makes you question whether spring will ever return. I stood at my bedroom window, watching Donald's car pull into the driveway. He'd called an hour earlier, his voice tight with exhaustion. She wants to meet with you, Mom. She says she needs to explain everything, make things right. I'd almost laughed at the audacity. After 2 days of documented lies crumbling around her, Lydia thought she could charm her way out of consequences. But I'd agreed to the meeting. Some battles required face-to-face engagement. I dressed carefully that morning. My orange wool dress, the one Hudson had always said made me look formidable in the best possible way. Pearl earrings, low heels, my wedding ring still on my left hand despite 3 years of widowhood. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A woman who had survived decades of marriage, motherhood, and loss, and who was not easily intimidated. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock. Through the peephole, I saw them both, Donald looking haggard and hollow-eyed, Lydia beside him in her designer coat, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the emotional carnage of the past 48 hours. I opened the door and stepped back, watching Lydia's face as she entered my home. She was beautiful in that carefully maintained way of women who spend significant money on their appearance. Manicured nails, professional highlights, skin that spoke of expensive creams and procedures. But now I saw it differently. Every detail of her polished exterior represented money that should have gone toward the house she and Donald were supposed to buy, the future they were supposed to build together. "Mrs. Lemon?" Lydia said, her voice warm with manufactured sincerity. "Thank you so much for agreeing to see me. I know this whole situation has been difficult. Please sit down," I said, gesturing toward the living room. I had arranged the chairs deliberately, Donald and Lydia on the sofa, me in Hudson's old recliner, positioned so I could observe both their faces clearly. Lydia perched on the edge of the sofa cushion, her posture suggesting someone ready to flee or fight. Donald sat beside her, but the distance between them spoke volumes. His body language was closed off, protective. "I want to start by apologizing," Lydia began, her hands clasped in her lap like a penitent schoolgirl. "I know how this must look, and I take full responsibility for my mistakes." Mistakes. As if systematic deception and theft were simple errors in judgment. "Which mistakes are you referring to specifically?" I asked, my voice neutral. Lydia's carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment. "The ring situation, obviously. I should have been more careful with something so precious. And I should have told Donald about my struggles with gambling instead of trying to handle it on my own." I leaned back in Hudson's chair, studying her face. She was good. I had to give her that. The tremor in her voice, the way she looked down at her hands when she mentioned gambling, the slight moisture in her eyes. If I hadn't seen the evidence of her calculated deceptions, I might have been moved. "How long have you been struggling with gambling?" I asked. "About 6 months," she said without hesitation. "It started small, just occasional trips to the casino with friends from work. But then I had a big win, and I thought I could make enough to surprise Donald with a down payment on a house. I know it sounds foolish now, but I genuinely believed I could control it." 6 months. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly. But my router logs showed casino-related activity dating back over a year, and Donald had mentioned business trips that now seemed suspicious going back even further. "And the business trips?" I continued. "Donald mentioned that several of those were actually gambling excursions." Lydia's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "A few of them, yes. I was ashamed to tell him what I was really doing. I thought if I could just win back what I'd lost, I could come clean and we could laugh about it someday." Donald spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. "Lydia, you took our entire down payment fund. $47,000. "I know," she said, turning to him with pleading eyes. "But I can get it back, Donald. I have a system now, a better understanding of the odds. If you just give me another chance." "Absolutely not." Donald's voice was flat. "I'm not giving you money to gamble away." Lydia's mask slipped for just a second, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. But she recovered quickly, turning back to me with renewed desperation. "Mrs. Lemon, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I love your son. We can work through this together. I've already contacted Gamblers Anonymous, and I'm committed to getting help." I set down my coffee cup and looked at her steadily. "Lydia, when you used my Wi-Fi 3 months ago, what files were you uploading?" The question caught her off guard. Her eyes darted to Donald, then back to me. Work files, like I told Donald." "What kind of work files?" "Client presentations, spreadsheets." Her voice was less certain now. I stood and walked to my desk, retrieving a folder I'd prepared that morning. Inside were printed copies of the router logs, highlighted and annotated with my careful handwriting. According to my network activity records, I said, settling back into my chair and opening the folder. You downloaded promotional materials from 3 different Atlantic City casinos, confirmed a hotel reservation at the Borgata, and exchanged emails with a debt consolidation company. The silence in the room was deafening. Lydia stared at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted horns. You kept records of my internet activity? I keep records of all activity on my network. It's a basic security measure. I consulted my notes. You also accessed several payday loan websites and researched pawn shops in the downtown area. Donald turned to stare at his wife, his face pale with fresh horror. Payday loans? Lydia, what else haven't you told me? Lydia's composure was cracking now, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the flush of panic spreading across her face. You can't just spy on people like that. That's an invasion of privacy. In my own home? On my own network? I raised an eyebrow. I think you'll find that I have every right to monitor my own internet connection. Lydia stood abruptly, her facade of contrition abandoned. This is ridiculous. Donald, are you going to let your mother treat me like a criminal? Aren't you? The words came out of Donald quietly, but they landed like a physical blow. How dare you? Lydia whirled on him, her voice rising. I made mistakes, yes, but I'm trying to make this right. I'm trying to save our marriage. By lying to my face for the past hour? Donald stood as well, his voice gaining strength. You said 6 months, Lydia. The records show over a year of casino activity. You said you were trying to win money for a house down payment, but you were researching debt consolidation and payday loans. Those records don't prove anything, Lydia shot back, desperation making her voice shrill. Maybe someone else used her Wi-Fi. Maybe the timestamps are wrong. Aycucks? I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. In her panic, Lydia was making exactly the kind of mistakes I'd been hoping for. Lydia, I said calmly, are you suggesting that someone else accessed my network, using your device, from inside my house, during the exact time period when you were visiting? She stared at me, trapped by the logic of her own desperate lie. Or are you suggesting that I falsified these records somehow? I continued. That a 62-year-old widow has the technical expertise to manufacture network logs and forge timestamps? I don't know how you did it, Lydia snapped, abandoning all pretense of reasonableness. But this is harassment. Donald, I'm your wife. Are you really going to choose your mother over me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, I saw the old Donald, the one who had always tried to keep peace, who had let Lydia pull him away from family gatherings, who had made excuses for her behavior. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something new in his eyes. Recognition, respect, and maybe, for the first time in years, he saw me not just as his mother, but as an ally. Lydia, he said quietly, I want you to leave. What? Leave. Go back to your sister's house. We'll talk tomorrow, but right now, I need you to go. Lydia's face contorted with rage. Fine, but don't think this is over. I have rights, Donald. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together. Everything we built together? Donald's voice was deadly quiet. You mean everything you gambled away? Lydia grabbed her purse and coat, her movements sharp and angry. At the door, she turned back one final time. You'll regret this, she said, looking directly at me. Both of you. After the door slammed behind her, Donald and I sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he looked up at me with something approaching awe. How long have you known? He asked. Known what? That you're the smartest person in this family. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Your father knew. He used to say I was the one who kept us all from falling apart, even when no one else noticed. I'm sorry, Mom, for not seeing it, for letting her... He gestured helplessly at the door. You couldn't have known, I said. She's very good at what she does. But she made one crucial error. What's that? I looked toward the window, where snow was beginning to fall again, each flake settling with quiet determination. She thought love made you weak, I said. She never understood that love can make you ruthless when someone threatens the people you care about. As we sat there in the growing dusk, I felt the final pieces of my transformation settling into place. The passive widow was gone, replaced by someone Lydia had never imagined existed. Someone who was just getting started. The call came on New Year's Eve, 3 minutes before midnight. I was curled in Hudson's old recliner, watching the ball drop in Times Square on television, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in my hands. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in years, not the hollow peace of loneliness, but the solid satisfaction of a woman who had reclaimed her place in her own life. Donald's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Mom, you need to see Lydia's divorce petition. She's asking for things that aren't even legally possible." I muted the television as the crowd cheered in the new year. "What kind of things?" "Half the value of your house, for starters. She's claiming it's a marital asset because I helped with maintenance over the years." His breath came sharp and angry through the phone. "She's also demanding alimony based on projected earnings from gambling wins she says I prevented her from achieving." I felt that familiar cold calculation settle in my chest. Lydia wasn't just desperate, she was stupid. Greed had made her overreach in ways that would be her undoing. "Donald, where are you filing the divorce?" "Here in the county. Judge Lucy McCallum is handling it." Judge McCallum. I smiled in the darkness of my living room. Lucy McCallum had been 3 years behind me at St. Anne's High School, and we'd served together on the hospital auxiliary board for 15 years. More importantly, Lucy had presided over Hudson's estate proceedings and knew exactly what I owned and how I'd acquired it. "What did your lawyer say about her claims?" "That they're mostly frivolous, but that we need to be prepared for a fight. She's hired some hotshot attorney from the city, probably with money she borrowed against our credit cards." Donald's voice cracked slightly. "Mom, I'm scared she's going to drag this out. Try to destroy both of us financially." "Let her try," I said quietly. "Donald, I want you to do something for me. Anything. Call your lawyer tomorrow and tell him I want to be a witness in the divorce proceedings. I have additional evidence that might be relevant." "What kind of evidence?" I walked to my desk and opened the file folder that had grown considerably thicker since Christmas Eve. Inside were printed emails, bank records, detailed timelines, and a comprehensive financial analysis that would have made Hudson proud. "The kind that will end this quickly," I said. 3 weeks later, I sat in the courthouse lobby, wearing my best black suit and clutching a leather portfolio that contained 2 years' worth of research. Donald sat beside me, nervously adjusting his tie every few minutes. "She looks confident," he murmured, nodding toward the other side of the lobby where Lydia sat with her attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who kept checking his Rolex. Lydia had dressed for battle in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair and makeup flawless. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal looking for escape routes. "Confidence and desperation often look similar from a distance," I said. When we were called into the courtroom, I felt the familiar comfort of being in Lucy McCallum's domain. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, but her presence commanded absolute respect. She nodded briefly in my direction, an acknowledgement between old acquaintances that spoke volumes. Lydia's attorney opened with a presentation that was impressive in its audacity. He painted a picture of a troubled marriage where Donald had been controlling and financially abusive, driving his client to seek comfort in gambling. He claimed that my house should be considered a marital asset since Donald had contributed to its maintenance, and that Lydia deserved compensation for the emotional trauma of being abandoned during her struggles with addiction. It was masterfully delivered nonsense, and I watched Lucy's face carefully as she listened. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was growing annoyed. Donald's lawyer responded competently, presenting evidence of Lydia's deception and theft. But his approach was defensive, reactive. He was trying to disprove Lydia's claims rather than building a case for justice. Then Lucy looked at me. "Mrs. Lemon, I understand you have testimony relevant to these proceedings?" I stood and walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Not just the divorce, but my entire transformation from invisible widow to strategic force. "Your Honor," I began, opening my portfolio, "I've spent the past month conducting a comprehensive analysis of the defendant's activities, and I believe the court should understand the full scope of her deception. Lydia's attorney objected immediately. Your Honor, Mrs. Lemon is not a financial expert or licensed investigator. Her testimony is irrelevant. Lucy looked at him with the kind of expression that had probably terrified lawyers for 20 years. Counselor, Mrs. Lemon is a victim of theft in this case, and she has every right to present evidence of crimes committed against her. Overruled. I smiled and continued. Your Honor, using network logs from my home internet connection, I was able to trace the defendant's gambling activities back 26 months, not the 6 months she claimed in her testimony. I handed a set of documents to the bailiff. These logs show consistent casino-related activity during periods when she told my son she was on business trips or visiting family. Cross-referencing with her credit card statements, which my son provided, shows a pattern of deception that predates their marriage. Lydia's face had gone pale, but her attorney was frantically taking notes, probably looking for procedural objections. Furthermore, I continued, I discovered that the defendant researched my personal financial situation extensively, including property values and inheritance laws. She made specific inquiries about whether my house could be considered community property if she and my son divorced. This was the bombshell I'd been saving. Lydia shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking completely. That's not true, she shouted. She's lying. Lucy's gavel came down like thunder. Mrs. Hughes? You will control yourself, or you will be removed from my courtroom. Lydia sank back into her chair, but the damage was done. Her outburst had confirmed the guilt that my evidence suggested. I continued methodically, laying out a timeline of manipulation that painted Lydia not as a troubled woman seeking help, but as a predator who had systematically exploited my son's trust and love. I presented evidence of payday loans she'd taken out in secret, pawnshop transactions that went far beyond the stolen ring, and correspondence with debt collectors that showed the true extent of her financial recklessness. Your Honor, I said, closing my portfolio, the defendant didn't just steal money and property. She stole time, years of family relationships that she poisoned with her lies. She systematically isolated my son from his family to better control and manipulate him. This wasn't addiction. This was predatory behavior with addiction as a convenient excuse. When I returned to my seat, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Lydia quietly crying. Whether from genuine remorse or calculated manipulation, I no longer cared. Lucy deliberated for exactly 17 minutes. When she returned, her face was granite. This court finds that the defendant engaged in systematic financial abuse and fraud during the marriage. Not only are her claims for spousal support denied, but I am awarding Mr. Lemon full restitution for documented theft, plus attorney's fees. Lydia's attorney started to stand, but Lucy wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges related to identity theft and fraud. Mrs. Hughes's claim that Mrs. Lemon's property should be considered a marital asset is not only denied, but borders on frivolous litigation. The gavel came down with finality that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. As we left the courthouse, Donald walked beside me in stunned silence. Lydia and her attorney had departed quickly through a side exit, but not before I caught the look of pure hatred she directed at me. It should have been frightening, but instead, it felt like validation. I can't believe it's over, Donald said finally. It's not over, I corrected. But the hard part is, now comes the rebuilding. We drove in comfortable silence back to my house. Our house, really, since Donald had moved into his old room while he sorted out his living situation. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table sharing a bottle of wine and planning his future. I keep thinking I should feel guilty, he said. Lydia's life is basically destroyed now. Lydia destroyed her own life, I replied. You just stopped enabling her to destroy yours too. He nodded slowly, then looked at me with something approaching awe. When did you become so formidable? I considered the question seriously. I think I always was, Donald. I just spent so many years making myself smaller to make everyone else comfortable that I forgot how to take up space. What changed? I looked around the kitchen where Hudson and I had raised our children, where I'd fed them and comforted them and sent them out into the world, where I'd sat alone for 3 years believing that my usefulness was over. Lydia made it personal, I said. She didn't just steal from you, she stole from me. My time with you, my place in your life, my own sense of worth. And that was the mistake that destroyed her. As we sat there planning Donald's fresh start, I felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Not just the legal victory, but the personal one. I had rediscovered something I'd lost after Hudson died. My own power, my own worth, my own fierce capacity to protect the people I loved. Lydia had thought she was dealing with a harmless old woman who could be pushed aside and forgotten. She had learned otherwise. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in my kitchen watching Donald load boxes into his truck. Not the desperate, hollow-eyed man who had stumbled onto my porch on that snowy December night, but someone transformed, shoulders straight, eyes clear, moving with the purposeful energy of a man rebuilding his life on solid ground. "You sure you don't want help with the heavy stuff?" he called through the window. "I'm 62, not 92, I called back, securing the last of the kitchen items in bubble wrap. "Besides, you're the one moving furniture up 3 flights of stairs." His new apartment was a converted loft downtown, walking distance from his law firm and close enough that he could visit me regularly without it feeling like an obligation. We'd found it together after 2 months of weekend apartment hunting, a ritual that had become less about finding him housing and more about rediscovering each other as adults. The doorbell rang, and I glanced at the clock. 2:30, right on schedule. "I'll get it," Donald called, jogging up the front steps. Through the window, I saw him embrace a woman with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Dr. Ann Stone, the therapist who had been guiding Donald through the aftermath of his marriage. But today, she wasn't here professionally. She was here as the woman who had quietly become part of our lives, part of his healing, and if I read the signs correctly, part of his future. I had watched their relationship develop with the careful attention of a mother who had learned to trust her instincts. Anne was nothing like Lydia. No calculated charm, no manufactured perfection. Instead, she offered something infinitely more valuable: genuine warmth, intellectual honesty, and the kind of steady presence that spoke of a woman comfortable in her own skin. "Mrs. Lemon," Anne said as they entered the kitchen together, "this is quite an undertaking. Are you sure you're ready for all this change?" I looked around the kitchen that had been my domain for 30 years. Hudson and I had planned meals here, argued about finances, celebrated Donald and Heidi's achievements. I had mourned here after his death, eaten solitary dinners, and slowly convinced myself that my useful life was over. But now the room felt different. Not because I was leaving, I wasn't, but because I was finally seeing it clearly. This wasn't a shrine to the past. It was the foundation for whatever came next. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, gesturing toward the boxes. "I'm just making room." The changes had begun gradually. Donald's temporary stay in his old bedroom had stretched from weeks to months. Not because he couldn't afford his own place, but because we'd discovered something neither of us had expected. We enjoyed each other's company. Not the dutiful relationship between adult child and aging parent, but the genuine friendship between two people who had survived trauma and come out stronger. The house had come alive again with conversation and laughter, with Donald's law books spread across the dining room table and Anne's occasional visits that had evolved from professional consultations to dinner invitations to something that made my son smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. "The garden looks incredible," Anne said, peering out the back window. "Donald told me you've been working on it all spring." I followed her gaze to the backyard that had been Hudson's pride and joy, now reclaimed from 3 years of benign neglect. The roses he'd planted were blooming again. The vegetable garden was producing tomatoes and herbs, and I'd added a small seating area where I could read in the evenings and watch the birds that nested in the old oak tree. "It needed attention," I said simply, but the truth was more complex. Working in the garden had been therapy. Each planted seed a small act of faith in the future. Each pruned branch a declaration that growth was still possible. The front door opened again, and Heidi's voice called out, "Mom, where do you want us to put the dessert?" My daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway, followed by her husband Oscar and their 2 teenagers. Heidi looked older than her 32 years. Life in Portland had been stressful, Oscar's job uncertain, money tight. But today, her face carried something I hadn't seen in months: relaxation. "You made it," I said, embracing her. When I'd called to invite them for Donald's going-away dinner, I'd half expected another polite excuse. Instead, Heidi had surprised me by asking if they could stay the weekend. "The kids wanted to see Uncle Donald's new place," she said, nodding toward 16-year-old Phoebe and 14-year-old Seth, who were already investigating the boxes with teenage curiosity. "And honestly, we needed the break. Things have been difficult," Oscar finished, shaking my hand. He was a good man, steady and kind, but I could see the strain around his eyes. "The company's been talking about more layoffs." "Well, you're here now," I said. "That's what matters." As the afternoon progressed, the house filled with the kind of organized chaos I remembered from holidays when the children were young. Donald and Oscar carried furniture while debating politics. Heidi and Anne discovered a shared interest in historical fiction, and the teenagers claimed the living room for some complicated game involving cards and dramatic accusations of cheating. I moved between the groups, refilling drinks and arranging food, but mostly just observing. This was what I had been missing during those years of canceled visits and careful distances. Not the performance of family togetherness, but the genuine comfort of people who belonged together. Around 6 o'clock, as we gathered around the dining room table for what Donald had declared the last supper in the old family configuration, I found myself looking at each face and seeing not just my children and their partners, but a constellation of relationships that had reformed and strengthened. "I want to propose a toast," Donald said, raising his wine glass. "To Mom, who taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to figure out what actually matters. To Grandma Kate," Phoebe added with the dramatic flair of a teenager, "who's basically a badass detective." The story of Lydia's downfall had become family legend, retold with varying degrees of accuracy and increasing admiration. I'd been cast as some sort of elderly vigilante, which amused me more than it should have. "To new beginnings," Heidi said quietly, looking directly at me. "And to remembering that family isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for." As we ate dinner, conversation flowing around the table like wine, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory or revenge. Lydia was facing criminal charges. The district attorney had pursued fraud and identity theft charges with surprising vigor, but her punishment felt distant now, unimportant compared to what we had built in its wake. After dinner, as Donald loaded the last of his boxes, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Anne. "He's different," she said, washing dishes at the sink. "Not just recovered, but genuinely changed." "We all are," I replied, drying the glasses. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you who you really are." "And who are you, Mrs. Lemon?" I considered the question, looking around the kitchen that remained mine but no longer felt like a lonely fortress. "I'm a woman who spent too many years making herself smaller to make other people comfortable, and I'm done with that." Anne smiled. "Good. Donald needs someone strong in his corner." "We all do." The doorbell rang one final time as Donald was loading the last box. Through the window, I saw a police car in the driveway, and for a moment, my blood chilled. But then I recognized Officer Adeline Warren, a neighbor's daughter who had joined the force 2 years ago. "Mrs. Lemon," she said when I opened the door, "I wanted to let you know that Lydia Hughes was arrested this morning. The fraud charges, she tried to use forged documents to access one of Donald's old accounts." I felt a flutter of something that might have been satisfaction, but it was muted now, academic. What happens next? Prison, most likely. 2 to 5 years depending on her plea. Adeline hesitated. "She asked me to tell you that she was sorry, for what it's worth." I nodded but said nothing. Lydia's apology, if genuine, was years too late and motivated by desperation rather than genuine remorse. Some betrayals were too complete for forgiveness, and I had made peace with that. After Adeline left, I stood on my front porch watching Donald secure the last of his belongings in the truck. The neighborhood was quiet in the way it only gets on summer evenings. Children called in for baths, adults settling onto porches with evening drinks. "You sure you're going to be okay here by yourself?" Donald asked, walking up the steps to where I stood. I looked at him, my son, healthy and whole and free from the poison that had been slowly killing him, and I felt that fierce maternal pride that had been buried under years of careful politeness and manufactured distance. "Donald," I said, "I've been taking care of this family for 35 years. I think I can handle a few quiet evenings." He laughed and hugged me, And for a moment, he was 7 years old again, seeking comfort after a nightmare. But then he pulled back, and I saw in his eyes the recognition that had been missing for so long. Not just love, but respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for saving me." "You saved yourself," I replied. "I just made sure you had a safe place to do it." As his truck disappeared around the corner, I remained on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, the house would be quiet again, but it would be a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow silence of abandonment, but the peaceful stillness of a woman who had reclaimed her place in the world. I had spent 3 years believing that my story was over, that widowhood and age had made me irrelevant. Lydia's betrayal had shown me how wrong I was. I wasn't invisible or powerless or forgotten. I was Kate Lemon. I was 62 years old, and I was just getting started.